We often imagine royal life as a fairy tale, full of lavish balls, stunning jewels, and absolute power. But what if I told you that for many kings, queens, princes, and princesses throughout history, life was more of a gilded cage than a dream come true? The reality was often a world of suffocating rules, constant danger, and profound loneliness. So, let us pull back the velvet curtain and explore why royal life was far less glamorous than you think. First, let's talk about power. Sure, monarchs held immense authority, but that power came with a heavy price, constant fear. The throne was a magnet for ambition and betrayal. A king or queen could never truly relax, because the next threat could come from anywhere: a rival noble, a foreign power, or even their own family. Brothers plotted against brothers, sons against fathers. This created an atmosphere of deep-seated paranoia. Every friendly smile could hide a dagger, and every whispered conversation could be a conspiracy. Imagine living your life suspecting everyone around you, even your closest relatives. It wasn't just a matter of losing power, it was about losing your life. Assassination was a very real and constant threat. Food tasters weren't just for show, they were a life or death necessity. Guards weren't just ceremonial, they were the only thing standing between the monarch and a violent end. This perpetual state of high alert would take a massive toll on anyone's mental health. Then there was the complete lack of privacy. From the moment they were born to the moment they died, every aspect of a royal's life was public property. The birth of a royal baby wasn't a private family moment. It was a state event, often witnessed by dozens of courtiers to ensure the legitimacy of the heir. Even the most intimate moments, like getting dressed in the morning or going to bed at night, were turned into elaborate public ceremonies. Think of the lever and couture ceremonies at the court of Louis XIV in France. High-ranking nobles would compete for the honor of handing the king his shirt. Every action, every word, every gesture was scrutinized, recorded, and judged by the court. You were a symbol, a performance, and the show had to go on, 24/7. The etiquette was another suffocating aspect of royal life. The rules governing behavior at court were incredibly complex and rigid. There was a right way and a wrong way to do everything. How to walk, how to talk, how to eat, even how to sit. A simple mistake, like using the wrong title or sitting in the wrong chair, could cause a major diplomatic incident or lead to your downfall at court. This wasn't just about being polite. It was a system designed to reinforce the social hierarchy and the monarch's supreme status. For the royals themselves, it meant living in a constant state of performance. Every movement was choreographed, every conversation was scripted. Spontaneity and genuine, unguarded moments were rare luxuries. This strict control extended to their personal lives, especially when it came to marriage. Royal marriages were almost never about love. They were political tools, pure and simple. A princess wasn't a person. She was a bargaining chip used to seal an alliance, end a war, or acquire territory. Young royals were often betrothed as children to people they had never met, from countries they had never seen, who spoke languages they didn't understand. Imagine being shipped off to a foreign land at 15, married to a stranger, and expected to produce an heir for a kingdom you barely know. Many royal couples were deeply unhappy, trapped in loveless unions for the good of the state, and the pressure to produce a male heir was immense. A queen's entire worth was often tied to her ability to give birth to a son. If she failed, she could be cast aside, divorced, or worse. The tragic story of Anne Boleyn, executed after failing to provide Henry VIII with a male heir, is a stark reminder of the brutal pressures faced by royal women. This lack of personal choice and the constant public scrutiny led to profound isolation. A monarch might be surrounded by hundreds of people at court, but they were often desperately lonely. Who could they truly trust? Who could they confide in without fearing their words would be used against them? They were set apart from everyone else by their divine right to rule. They couldn't have normal friendships. Every interaction was filtered through the lens of status and power. They lived on a pedestal, which is a very lonely place to be. This isolation, combined with the constant fear and pressure, could lead to severe emotional and psychological distress. But unlike today, there was no concept of mental health support. A monarch showing any sign of weakness could risk being seen as unfit to rule. So they suffered in silence, trapped in their gilded cages. Even the luxuries of royal life came with significant downsides. The food, while plentiful, was often incredibly rich and unhealthy. Gout, a painful form of arthritis caused by rich food and drink, was so common among the upper classes it was known as the disease of kings. Medical care was primitive by today's standards. While they had the best physicians available, medical knowledge was limited. Procedures we consider routine were life-threatening, and a simple infection could be a death sentence. And what about those magnificent palaces? They were often cold, drafty, and unsanitary. With hundreds of people living and working in close quarters before the advent of modern plumbing, sanitation was a huge problem. The beautiful gardens of Versailles might have looked idyllic, but the palace itself was notoriously smelly. So, while the crowns were heavy with jewels, they were also heavy with fear, responsibility, and loneliness. The power of a monarch was immense, but it came at the cost of personal freedom, privacy, and genuine human connection. Life was a relentless performance on a public stage, where one wrong move could mean disaster. It was a world where family could be your deadliest enemy, and marriage was a political contract. The next time you see a fairy tale about a prince or a princess, remember the hidden realities. The glamour was often just a facade, hiding a much darker, more complicated, and surprisingly bleak existence. The gilded cage, no matter how beautiful, is still a cage. Ever wondered what it was really like to live in a palace? Last time, we talked about why royal life wasn't as glamorous as you might think. Today, we're diving deeper, going beyond the gilded gates to uncover the strict, suffocating reality of a day inside what was essentially a beautiful prison. Forget fairy tales. This was a world of rigid schedules, constant surveillance, and the ever-present shadow of fear. Imagine waking up, not to the gentle rays of the sun, but to a predetermined schedule that dictates your every move. From the moment your eyes open, you are no longer an individual, but a symbol. Your day isn't yours. It belongs to the state, to tradition, and to the hundreds of people whose lives and livelihoods depend on you. The day begins with the levee, the royal rising ceremony. This wasn't just about getting out of bed, it was a public spectacle. High-ranking nobles would crowd into your bedchamber, all vying for the honor of watching you wake, wash, and dress. Every action was ritualized. One person would hand you your shirt, another your waistcoat, another your wig. Privacy was a concept that simply didn't exist. Imagine dozens of eyes on you before you've even had your morning coffee. This wasn't about comfort. It was about reinforcing the social hierarchy. Being present at the levee was a sign of one's status and favor with the monarch. Breakfast wasn't a quiet affair either. It was often another public meal, or petit couvert eaten under the watchful gaze of courtiers. Every bite you took was observed, every conversation overheard. You couldn't just have a simple chat. Every word was scrutinized for hidden meanings, for signs of political favor or displeasure. The food itself, though lavish, might arrive cold after its long journey from the kitchens through a series of formal handovers. After the morning rituals, the day would be filled with an endless parade of official duties. There were council meetings, where matters of state were debated, often with the monarch having the final, heavy say. Decisions that affected millions of lives rested on your shoulders, and any sign of weakness or indecision could be politically fatal. Then there were the audiences, where you'd receive ambassadors, petitioners, and nobles. You had to be constantly unpoised, intelligent, and inscrutable. A misplaced word or a tired expression could be interpreted as a political statement, potentially sparking an international incident or a domestic conspiracy. Even moments of supposed leisure were anything but relaxing. A walk in the palace gardens, you'd be accompanied by a retinue of attendants and guards. The paths were patrolled, the gates were locked. You were never truly alone. The beautiful, sprawling gardens of Versailles or the Forbidden City were not parks for personal enjoyment. They were extensions of the palace's controlled environment. Every corner was designed to impress and to be easily monitored. Lunch, the grand caviar, was the most public meal of all. The royal family would dine on a raised platform, in full view of anyone who was appropriately dressed and wanted to watch. It was pure theater. Tourists and courtiers would file past, gawking as you ate. The pressure to maintain perfect etiquette under hundreds of judging eyes must have been immense. Can you imagine trying to enjoy a meal while being a literal tourist attraction? The afternoon would bring more ceremonies, perhaps a hunting party, which sounds like fun, but was another highly ritualized event, governed by strict rules and precedents. Or maybe you'd attend a chapel service, another public performance of piety. Every single activity was a reinforcement of power and a public display. There was no off switch. Throughout the day, you were surrounded by people, yet profoundly isolated. The servants who catered to your every need were also spies. Maids, valets, guards, they were all potential eyes and ears for rival factions within the court. A casual remark to a chambermaid could be twisted and reported to a political enemy. Trust was a luxury you couldn't afford. The walls literally had ears. In places like the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, a special grill, the Kezawai Adol, or Cage of Justice, allowed the Sultan to secretly observe council meetings, ensuring his ministers never forgot who was in charge. This constant surveillance bred a culture of paranoia. Who was a friend? Who was a foe? The person smiling at you during a court ball could be plotting to replace you. The relative sharing a joke could be coveting your throne. This fear wasn't just in your head. History is filled with tales of monarchs being deposed, exiled, or worse, by those closest to them. The gilded cage was designed as much to keep enemies out as it was to keep the royal figure in. The guards weren't just for protection from external threats. They were also your jailers. The Forbidden City in Beijing is a perfect example. It was a city within a city, with massive walls, a moat, and thousands of guards. The emperor and his family rarely, if ever, left its confines. For the emperor's concubines, it was a life sentence. They entered as young girls, and many would never see the outside world again, living and dying within those crimson walls, competing for a moment of the emperor's attention. As evening fell, the performance continued. There would be balls, concerts, or theatrical performances. Again, these were not for simple enjoyment. Seating arrangements were a political minefield. A dance partner choice could signal favor, and your attendance was mandatory. You had to be seen, to be the radiant center of the court's universe, even if you were exhausted or anxious. Finally, the day would end as it began, with a public ceremony, the kucha, the royal going-to-bed ritual. Once again, the nobles would gather to watch you undress and get into bed. It was the final act of a day-long play. Only when the curtains were drawn around your four-poster bed did you have a semblance of privacy. But even then, were you truly alone? Guards stood outside your door. Attendants slept in adjoining rooms. The quiet of the night was likely filled with the weight of your responsibilities and the fear of the next day's performance. This was the reality of palace life. It was a life of immense power, but also of profound confinement. Every minute was scheduled, every action scrutinized, every relationship a potential threat. The luxury was a trap, the deference a constant reminder of your isolation. It was a life where the crown was both a symbol of ultimate authority and the heaviest of chains. So next time you see a picture of a grand palace, remember the person who lived inside.